Okay, so I'm not Kelvin. I'm not going to make you clap for me. No, but because it's a little blinding, can I actually ask everyone to just raise one hand really quick? I just need to see something. Okay, so what I'm going to say today is that if I start talking too fast, like the gentleman yesterday, please raise your hands. If I see more than 3 to 5 of them raised, I'll slow down, but I got a half an hour, so I want to make sure I get everything in. So just do me that favor if you don't mind. Okay, so I have to have the obligatory slide about who I am. I don't really want to talk about any of that stuff. I kind of want to talk about why I am standing on a stage and why that's important to me. I like to consider that I am passionate about being vulnerable, about the mistakes that I've made. Last year I talked to you about how I let somebody basically just take our RMM and make a lot of mistakes with it. And I think I had a lot of feedback afterwards of people who had stories that were very similar. And I think it's really easy for us to get caught up in the let's make it perfect, but I think when we share stories and we get kind of going, then we're able to kind of come up with frameworks and stuff to stop those things from happening. All right, so I'm going to talk about things that are like a solution, but they are things that have worked for me. It doesn't mean that you're going to have to do the same thing. Really, I want you guys to have a good set of questions to ask yourself, some concepts, some ideas to be investigating so that when you go back to your own teams, for whatever size that they are, that you are prepared and you're thinking of the right things, because that's what I'm the most passionate about. I think we've heard a lot of really great talks. It's kind of interesting that I'm towards the end. I think I've heard some frameworks from my friend Jim. I've heard about the types of people that you can hire and have inside of your team that might be untraditional automators from Ash and Brian. I've heard, from Kelvin, he talked about his journey a little bit. What I want to actually talk to you about is like, if you get this in your team and you get it going and you put this in place and this is automation as a service is something you go after, what kind of things should you be considering in order to make sure that you're not in a position to get caught not having planned or prepared for that, okay? All right. So this is a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be going through. So like why, what brought this about? This is where I tell you the things that we did that probably shouldn't have done. And then a little bit of the vocabulary. I'm kind of fortunate to have a lot of friends that are in the vendor space, and through that you get to hear a lot of software development terms. And these have actually been really interesting to ponder and consider as an MSP because we were never in that space before, but it is actually pretty pertinent to how automation should be considered, in my opinion. So we'll go through that a little bit. And then the mindset. So if you've heard, has everybody heard of the term MVP? I want to know where we're at in the room. Can you raise your hand if you have? Okay, there's a lot of people in the front, not a lot of people in the back. That's actually good. Good for me. So we want to talk about that and understand its impact, and then also how this is going to work in MSP life, because what a vendor has in terms of software development with PE money and VC money, we all know is not necessarily MSP life, right? So it's about talking about that. So of course I had to go to ChatGPT because if we're talking about automation, AI is automation, and that's a hill I will die on. And they came up with this lovely quote, and I quite like it. It's planning is like a seatbelt for your automation. Sure, you could go without it, but enjoy the dashboard to the face. This is really what I'm trying to say. I don't care what your plan is. I don't care if it's just that these things have to happen in an order in your ticket notes or whatever the case may be that makes sense for your size. You should have a plan. You should say, when you're talking to your people and you're training them, much like what Kelvin talked about with his team, then you need to make sure that you have something where you've delineated to them, you're teaching them what it is that they need to be considering in order to make these things go. Give them freedom. I like to say when you have a team, you should be giving them the foundation. They can build whatever walls they want to, they can bring whatever they want to it, but they should understand the basis by which things are made. I think that automation is like a software. It should be considered like a software because it could break the same way that software could break. And so when we're talking about these things, I really want you to think about not the small scripts, not the easy wins we're talking about, but the longer ones, or when you take sub-workflows together and make them into something bigger. That's generally what I'm talking about. Just like software, automation needs structure, identifying requirements, design, testing, deployment, and a plan for maintenance. They don't scale well when they're built on chaos. Cat fax is fun. It's like really good to automate that stuff to kind of tease everybody and bring office culture. However, when we're talking about things that we're going to go out to clients with, when we're talking about making automation as a service go, the last thing that you want to do is not having planned something or planned for how it could go wrong and then turn to the client and say, whoops, because you just billed them for that, right? And it's really easy to forget about those things, but if you were thinking about them ahead of time, then you could turn around and have a conversation where you're ahead of the game a little bit and they're not the one reporting that something's wrong to you. You're turning around and saying to them, like we all know when we've got a vendor that there's an outage and we're the one reporting to them that there's an outage, it doesn't feel great. But when the vendor comes to you and says, we know, we've got it, we're on it, that's an important thing. It says that the person has the ability to stay in control. So that's what we want to be communicating to our clients. This helps prevent duplication because I have had in situations, especially with documentation, where people are working on the same thing at the same time and because nobody's talking, right? Having the structure that everybody's kind of comparing notes on what they're working on, super important. And then it also aligns the solutions with business outcomes. So last year in my talk, I talked about how we have created an ROI framework. I also don't want to babysit and hold techs back from doing what they want to do. I want them to have that ability. However, I also want to make sure they're considering the business outcomes. So we put something in place to be able to make sure that that happens. Just make sure that you're teaching people properly is basically what I'm talking about. And treat it like code and make it built to last. It is a hard thing to consider because realistically, every time somebody does an update, every time Microsoft changes something, we're picking on them for this specifically, but when you consider how much that affects what we do, you have to plan for it, and you have to have some modularity to what you're doing so that if you need to replace something or walk it back, that you're kind of ready for that. All right, so the DevOps lifecycle this is basically the way that development and operations work together. This is what most software companies would do in some shape or form. There's many different ways to approach it, but you plan, and the plan is really what's the scope, what's the requirements, what problem are we solving for, and what tools are we going to be using in order to solve that problem. When I talk to you about this, I'm not looking for you to have teams or a specific regimented anything. It could be literally a piece of paper, but these are the things that when you're conceptualizing larger strings of automation that needs to be in there. So then we go on to develop. So the develop side is like when you have your requirements list, when you've gotten information from your stakeholders, you're going to talk about what the MVP is. And we'll get into that in one of the next. Actually, I'll just go through it now, but MVP is minimum viable product. And actually, the first time I heard this term was when we were implementing Halo with Mendy. And Mendy was like, we got to a certain point, we're like, how long before we're going to go live? He's like, you get to decide. I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, at any time that you feel comfortable with the product the way that it is, you get to decide. And we actually are very thankful that we had someone who was able to walk us through that first week, all the things that needed to be changed. But there was a concept that came afterwards when he was joined by Al, and the concept was minimum viable product, talking about what that baseline is that needs to be there in order to move ahead with something. And you can look at a big, long automation that you want to have, but what's the smallest piece that we can put in right now that'll be a win? And not have to worry about the whole big picture right away. We can iterate. That is the way that software is built. All of our vendors have release notes for a reason because they're constantly changing and upgrading based on not only how the environment is changing, but also on the stuff that they're doing to make it better and more valuable for us. So minimum viable product addresses like what's the bare minimum we can do in order to be able to get that out. Which I might be forgetting about a slide later, so it's fine if I covered it ahead of time. I'm just zooming along here. And then there's the build. So these are when you take the pieces that you've been investigating and make them into the bigger working unit. So you might have been modular before, but now we're talking about how we can string them together. You got to check for dependencies, inputs and outputs, get ready for testing. It's basically just being ready for the real world, and it's the version that makes sense in your mind. But when you go to test it, you're going to hand it to someone else, and you're going to say, this was the thing that I created in my mind. This is what I thought would work. And then they're going to turn around and they're going to put it through its paces and find out all the ways that maybe you hadn't considered it could be used. There's a term, I believe, and where's Alden? It's like the edge cases. And this is that process. It's the things that you hadn't considered because maybe it's not the way that you would have done it, but somebody else is going to find that for you, and making sure that you have that ability to have someone who's running it through the testing and what they're looking for, that's important. Especially if you're going out to your clients, because they're going to think of things differently than you have, and you want to know if you've hit the mark. When we talk about releasing it, sending it into the wild, you're going to want to make sure that you're creating the feedback loop for that, and a lot of training and documentation about what you're sending out. Think about our vendors, they send out release notes for a reason, so you can ask questions and you can look through and see what's coming and what might be different. So the same is true for our clients. Or even our staff, we do a thing on Fridays where the automation team, whatever they've been working on, they do a roadmap recap, which is what we call our automation roadmap, and they highlight anything that they've released to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing and that they've understood that we're go live, we're done, this is happening, and that it's time to give feedback. On that, the deploy, right? So then you go ahead, you ship it off into the night, activate it, and like making sure that those people have that way to get back to you, what they've seen from a verbal point of view is important, but building things that have feedback loops, pass, fail, whatever you might want to say, that's also important, because you want to operate and monitor what you've built, right? You don't want to just make something that just goes and then you never look at it again. You want to make sure that you can track the performance of it, so that's why often companies like Roos will talk to you about making sure that you've built in the time savings into it. These are all so that you can know if what you've done is successful, and there are many points of success that we need to be measuring. And the other piece that we should be looking at is adoption, right? So you can make this really cool automation, but if none of your staff are using it, there's got to be a reason why, right? So you got to be able to get that feedback verbally, and then when you don't see the adoption on it, you need to be asking why not. All right, this is I already went over number 2. So are you familiar with these terms at all? I mean, this crowd is going to be familiar with these terms, yes. So let's go through and talk about some of these. So requirements gathering, that's pretty obvious. This is basically the structure by which you're going to say to anyone in your company, if you're going out for a client especially, and you're doing something that you're hoping to sell to them as an automation as a service, you should have some sort of structure where you know the questions that you need to ask to be able to understand what problem they're solving for, and you know what they might need from this to accomplish. MVP we already went over. The testing plan. So I don't know about you guys, but I've had where I signed on a new software and I say to an engineer, hey, can you test this and tell me, you know, if it works or if it's easily deployed or whatever, but I don't give more information than that. And they'll come back and be like, yeah, it's good, it works. And then we go to deploy it, and next thing you know, we didn't know about this, we didn't know about this. You know, this is more difficult for this specific client because of their requirements. So really, just having a set of questions. It doesn't have to be about being accountable. It has to do with that training piece that we were talking about before. Having a set of questions that you expect them to go through as the testing phase or testing plan, that's important. Go live, super important to be able to communicate to clients or to your team, this is what we're doing, and have a structured way to do that they know what to expect and when to pay attention. The modularity part, that is really just building things in blocks versus trying to do beginning to end. I think Jared from Raven actually has a really good story about this one automation that he built, which was absolutely insane and so much time in the beginning, and he realized that he wasn't going to get the ROI till later, right? So you want to do these things in small little blocks. And then the most fun and sexy one of all, which is change control, right? If we've done this for anything else in our MSP, which I really hope you're doing, change control is super important when it comes to doing anything with automation on a larger scale, because then when something breaks, you have more of an idea of what the hell broke. So there's that. And then my last one I left, which was kind of interesting, because this is the reason why I think I'm in automation to begin with. So for those who don't know me, I actually started in business world entrepreneurship as a wedding photographer. And there was a little tool that we would use back then called If This Then That. And this is exactly what that is. It is a ideology of looking at what needs to happen from beginning to end. If this happens, then this happens, and the decision trees that go along with it. And that was something that I actually used a lot of in that space. And realistically, when you're thinking about sitting down with an admin or a receptionist or whatever, this is something they can grasp. They can understand this. They're going to tell you with their job how they do this already. So it's something where you can bring people who are admin or who aren't as technical in and have them participate, have them be able to show you the logic of their decisions and give you the feedback that you need, because though they might do it a certain way, we're going to know, looking at it, how we can automate it, how we can use the technical side, but they know their role and their job the best. The logic paths are the best way for them to show that to us. Okay, so when we're talking about MVP, I know I already explained what it was, but we need to have a discovery process for this, right? You have to bring all the people involved. Best example of this is actually, I don't know, like if you have engineers, we have engineers in the room, how many times have you had a client say to you at 5 o'clock on a Friday, I got somebody starting on a Monday, I need them like set up right away? Oh, it happens all the time, that's bullshit. And so when we think about involving all the stakeholders, we can turn around and say to our clients, well, we really need you to do a better job of notifying us, but really we're going through a contact and then somebody in HR is the one who's making the decision. They didn't hire the person on Friday. They hired the person before that. The person who was involved in the hiring was not part of the conversation with us. So if we're going to solve that problem, we need to bring that person into the room. And they tell us, okay, well, when we hire someone, we actually send an offer out and they sign a contract digitally. Wonderful. What contract software do you use? Let's find out at the moment of contract signing, and then that way we can begin the process, because you already know that you've hired someone. Something is automated in the background, we get notified, and we can start setting up accounts. And we're not working from behind, right? So involving the right people in the conversation is super important. And in turn, they're going to tell you where they have pain. I think Kelvin did a really good job of highlighting that, and then like how you can get to that. I don't want to dive too much into it, but, oh God. It'll help you connect the dots though, right? Like you want to be able to pull what makes sense to the people who are in HR, to the people who are in finance, and be able to pull them along. And when we talk about modularity, you can also think that way as well, right? You're going to look for high frequency wins. If anybody's attended a rock call, this is something they repeat quite often. You want to look for the things that happen often, but that's also true for clients, right? Establishing the smallest win and logical building blocks is the best way to move forward. It's got to be simple enough to test and deploy fast, and it'll open the door to bigger wins later. All right. This is like probably the most, I highlighted it already, but to me it's probably the most important part. How mad do you get when your software goes down or when you have downtime, when you're relying on it to do your business? Your clients will be the same way. You need to consider these things and not just go, this is our efficiency that we're dealing with internally. If you're going to build something that you put in a client space and make them rely on it, you better maintain it and have really great communication surrounding what's going on with it, because otherwise when it fails, it's going to be you that gets canceled or that gets yelled at, and you have to plan for that. So being able to have that communication and to monitor when things are up or down is a super important part of that. All right. So I talked about how this was, kind of crazy to think about it. This big software companies with all these teams and money, well, that's not MSP life, right? So not every MSP runs the same either. We're not standardized. We work off, as I quote here, no time, no staff, no budget. So we got to get creative. And I think the most highlight I could say from my entire talk, if I was going to give you one thing to go away with, is these things in this slide. Release notes are your friend. Get good at reading them, get good at understanding how they impact what you've built. Have a plan to have the release notes for the commonly used software that you've built integrations for and automations for, sent to an alert email, whatever the case may be, and have someone be reviewing those things. Have any of the possible impacts be something that's treated as a ticket that your automation team should look at. Avoid perfection, right? It'd be great if we could have everything exactly the way it should, but sometimes you have to build something fast and try and see what happens. Keep in mind how much impact there is, but to quote my friend Matt Lee, do not go with the minimum viable crappiness either. Do not settle for something that is just kind of half-baked. If you're gonna put it in place, like, you have to consider the impact of it. Template, please, template. Just have something for people to follow, and that way they can turn around and you can release that freedom to them. I know for some people what Kelvin said would be scary, to just let people go and do what they want, but if you have a template and they have something to work off of, then you know that they're gonna be looking at the stuff that you consider important as an owner. Involve the front lines. I think some of our best automations has actually come from our help desk, like tier 1 technicians. They push those things because all they do is act like therapists for your clients. They sit there and have to listen to all the things that they complain about, and that's where great ideas for automation come from. Having a change process is another one, and establishing verification, which if you are a Roost user already, you probably hear quite a bit, but making sure that you know when things fail, and that's no matter what automation platform you use. There should be some sort of loop back telling you. And then ownership matters, and I don't mean like someone like me who's an owner. I mean, when you're working on something, when you're moving something forward, your role in moving it forward, it matters. You own that process. You are the one who's guiding it from beginning to end, even if other people are involved in it. So understand the relevance and importance of the role that you hold and make sure that you're seeing it through. And then the last one, which is also very unsexy, which is plan for training and documentation. There's like every automation engineer I've ever worked with, like, generally hates this part. But the reality is, if you want to scale, if you want to go across the team, you know, you have to plan for when the person who's great at it is no longer in the room. And if you don't know what it does, and you can't say why you did it or why you chose the decisions that you did, then, you know, it's really difficult for anyone to take it and iterate or take it and grow it or use it any other way unless they were there for the build. And that is not scalable. So my, I guess, succinct way of saying all that is like structure over size, process over polish, iterate, and accumulate. Plan with logic or your automation will boldly go absolutely nowhere useful. All right, I think I finished in less time. Do I get to have questions?